Central Florida in the late 1980s was gearing up to become the next big thing in entertainment, with Disney and Universal both planning massive theme park projects inspired by Hollywood backlots. Nickelodeon Studios at Universal Studios Florida was the crown jewel, blending a working studio with a theme park attraction where visitors could peek behind the scenes of their favorite 90s shows. But as quickly as it rose, Nickelodeon Studios fell silent by the mid-2000s, leaving them deserted for years to come. Today, we're delving into the mysteries of Nickelodeon Studios, a once thriving hub of creativity, now a time capsule awaiting exploration. It just so happened that in the mid-1980s, Disney and Universal Studios planned major Florida theme parks. Michael Eisner, former CEO of the Walt Disney Company, already made Disney World well-established with 2 theme parks. A theme park and major live-action and animation studios were planned. However, Universal was already developing something comparable. They planned Universal Studios Florida, their first theme park outside of Hollywood, to have a production studio and a theme park. This was marketed as the new Hollywood of the South, a cheaper alternative to making film and television in California, and a method for these firms to make money on tours of those productions. It was a novel idea, with a lot of buzz and a strong Disney-Universal rivalry. Then there was Nickelodeon, a well-established and financially stable kids channel that had been making hit shows like Rated K for Kids, Mr. Wizard's World, Pinwheel, and Double Dare. The catch was that Nickelodeon has sites all around North America where they are filming these shows. They were disorganized and unable to scale new products since they lacked a significant central production site. The design of Universal Studios Florida was nearly complete by the late 1980s, even though the building was underway. They were almost done with their Florida sound stages. Universal gave Nickelodeon the concept of partnering to build a production facility that would entice younger children to Universal and create a year-round interactive attraction at Production Central. Nickelodeon signed a multi-year lease in 1988 to use a big administration facility and 2 sound stages. They became Stage 18 and Stage 19, with B17 as the intermediary building. Most concept art and the public model don't show it because it was added last minute to the park. It would now be on a new street south of the park off the main road. Nickelodeon Studios Florida opened on June 7, 1990, alongside Universal Studios Florida. The studio facade had a lively, vibrant 90s color palette, typical of Nickelodeon. The courtyard had Nickelodeon benches and the Slime Geyser, which was theatrically unveiled later that year. Photo opportunities, props, and a souvenir store followed. When the park initially opened, you didn't feel too detached from where you'd arrived because, beyond those photo possibilities, there was a rather vast empty field and the parking lot, where the trees didn't hide well. No matter, the true draw was inside. After waiting under a vast green canopy, you'd ascend an escalator through the studio to a large open-air loft with character murals. Large, elevated, and glass-enclosed walkways over the stages let you look down on the productions and have a guide describe them. Nickelodeon's contract with Universal required them to produce almost every day, so guests could always see something new. The tour includes control rooms, costuming, a kitchen, and, intrusively, dressing rooms. Kids might also participate in game shows and audition for TV shows being taped that day. Those who weren't chosen could still watch the live studio show. Both the tour and the performances shot at the studios changed frequently throughout the early 1990s. Nick Jr. recorded scenes at Goggola Island and Eureka's Castle. Game shows such as Figure It Out, Nick Arcade, Nickelodeon Guts, Global Guts, What Would You Do? Legends of the Hidden Temple and the many Double Dare variants were the most frequent on the list, with sketch comedy shows like Roundhouse and All That rounding out the lineup. Keenan and Kel and Launchbox were 2 other popular shows. Many more shows were being filmed there. Those were only a few of the more prominent ones. Nearly every Nickelodeon original show from the early to mid-1990s was filmed in Florida. It's clear that the early studio years were exhilarating. The premiere program was a significant occasion, and commercials were aired throughout America, inviting kids to visit Nickelodeon behind the scenes. The studio was heavily marketed in other places as well, most notably in the shows themselves, where hosts would showcase the facilities, talk to visitors, host events, and reveal where the shows were shot. Especially remarkable was the 1992 time capsule barrier. Children assembled a pop culture collection, which will not be unveiled until 2042 in a special broadcast for the ceremony. Mike O'Malley hosted the event and predicted that future kids would always be able to visit this area and the world's first headquarters for kids, which turned out to be wishful thinking. Although the theme park was considered very disappointing on opening day, for those interested in the making of television shows, Nickelodeon was an integral aspect of their time at Universal. In addition to taking visitors behind the main stages and beyond the paths, the park's tram tour would also pass directly through the courtyard. However, Nickelodeon was beginning to suffer the long-term consequences of the film production in Florida. As it turned out, most people didn't want to move to Central Florida. Besides, production labor was cheaper, and Nickelodeon wasn't required to recruit union workers, while the talent pool was also much less competent. Cross-country for filming. It got tricky when directors recorded their shows off-site. The situation became increasingly complex as more and more directors started filming their shows off-site. Due to contractual obligations to production space, theme park guests were continually moving through active and inactive, made-to-look active areas. Being constantly watched made this workplace less than ideal for staff and talent. Overall, Universal Studios Florida and Disney MGM Studios have this issue. Theme park rides, endless guests, and rain on metal sound stages were continuous annoyances. Disney began planning and building new attractions without backstabbing them. Universal was developing, turning this theme park into a resort with new infrastructure, hotels, landscaping, a shopping and entertainment center, and a brand new theme park called Islands of Adventure. The resort's approximately $3 billion investment included upgrades to Universal Studios' original park. It followed Disney's lead in the mid to late 1990s, when the company began to construct original attractions based on intellectual property rather than using backlot theming. As part of the park's rebranding, the studio tram tour was phased out. Actually, nothing noteworthy was being shot on location at Universal Studios Florida, which is why the park wasn't receiving the same amount of high-profile film and television projects as it was in California. Backlot tours failed to pique guests' curiosity. Even Nickelodeon Studios' original programming was starting to dwindle, leaving just Nickelodeon Studios as a source for genuine productions. Numerous filmmakers and producers pushed for returning to the Golden State. With the rebranding to Nickelodeon Studios West, the Burbank Animation Studio officially opened its doors to the public in 1998. On top of that, Nickelodeon began making use of the smaller Burbank sound stages that were accessible. Florida was clearly going downhill. The studio hosted many Nickelodeon shows last seasons, while others returned to Los Angeles or New York. By 1999, the studio's production number of shows had plummeted, with the consequence that the studio tour became uninteresting and didn't satisfy guests. They switched to a highlight reel of Nickelodeon's best moments, showing active production at some point. Slime Time Live, Taina, and the last two seasons of Kenan and Kel were the last major shows to film at the Florida studios. Ultimately, Nickelodeon's Splat was the last television series to film there. The game show, whose run was cut short after just one season. In 2001, Nickelodeon downsized from full-time to seasonal productions. Nickelodeon formally transitioned from a year-round to a seasonal production studio model, while the building and sound stages would be used for special events. The contract would be filled by a skeletal workforce producing only programs. For the rest of the contract's duration, a minimal team would be responsible for producing all programs. And with the 2001 shutdown, the studio tour would no longer accept visitors. Universal Studios Florida relies on Nickelodeon to attract younger visitors, so this was a big blow. For several years, the studio was ready for filming. In the empty hallways, the highlight reel looped as the slime geyser sprayed green water. The Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards, pre-shows, and 2004 You Pick Live election between the two new SpongeBob characters were the final significant events. Nick agreed to leave on April 30th, 2005, since no production was happening. After 14 years, a raw 650 performances filmed, over 3,000 episodes produced, and 2.5 million children on studio tours, the doors closed permanently. In order to better suit their own needs, Universal started renovating the building and eventually rebranded it as Universal Studios Production Group. The original color scheme was covered up, and the sound stages were reused. After reopening the other stages, Universal formally opened Soundstage 19 for rentals in 2006. Nevertheless, the B-17 Administrative Building, which formerly served as the primary interactive studio tour, would remain closed. While the idea of Nickelodeon Studios was fresh, actually making television in Florida proved to be far more challenging. In contrast to the well-established Hollywood production sector, it was completely new. Rather than having vision, Nickelodeon's upper management misunderstood their workers' desires. That doesn't mean it was a bust. In fact, it spawned a slew of talented young artists and created some of Nickelodeon's finest original series. Those who went on the tour also thought well of it, and it has a positive impact on a whole generation of children who remember it fondly from their childhood. There was a long period when the studio was unoccupied, and the Nicktoons Cafe remained mostly undisturbed. Tourists interested in seeing hidden Nickelodeon artifacts frequented the area regularly. However, the sound stages were occasionally used for private or corporate events, as Universal never developed a solid strategy for the complex. In 2006, Stage 19 was utilized for American Idol productions. Later, in 2011, Stage 19 was transformed for a new Blue Man Group production, becoming the Sharpaquos Theater. For the next decade, this theater occupied the backstage area, outdoor paths, and entrance courtyard, allowing audiences to wander through the former Nickelodeon administration building. To prepare for a new theme park expansion, the courtyard time capsule was removed in 2016. While the Blue Man Group show closed in 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Universal Orlando Resort's Epic Universe had already begun development in 2019. The space previously occupied by the Blue Man Group is planned for conversion into another attraction. Nickelodeon Studios, once the core of Universal Studios Florida, signaled a new era for both corporations but was demolished in 2005. The studio, initially envisioned as the first kids' headquarters and the new Hollywood of the South, did not turn out as planned. Despite its failure, visitors were left with a lasting impression. Although the site no longer exists and is unrelated to Nickelodeon or Universal now, it remains crucial to television production history. Let us know what you found in this video by leaving a comment. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a thumbs up if you enjoyed watching this video.
Go downstairs. Go downstairs. I never touched it. I never handle this. I never touched that. Let us handle this.
I never touched that bowl.